Sheikh Khalid al-Zahiri's mansion was a symbol of power. Situated on a vast estate on the outskirts of one of the most vibrant cities in the United States, its imposing structure reflected not only the status of the man who owned it, but also his dominance over everything around him. No one dared question his orders, and his needs were met with almost military precision. But within those luxurious walls, there was a quiet routine, where the Sheikh's power seemed to feed on his solitude. Amara Sullivan, on the other hand, never imagined that a job like working as a maid in the Sheikh's mansion would change her life. Raised in a simple family, she grew accustomed to the constant struggle to survive and help her mother. When she was hired to work there, she believed it would be a chance to earn a little more money and perhaps have a more comfortable life. She knew the Sheikh's mansion was too big for someone like her, but the job was necessary. At first, Khalid saw her as just another of the many servants who passed through his house, and he didn't care to get to know her. She was just a servant, worthless, someone there to serve. Amara knew her place and had no illusions about the power he wielded. Her sole mission was to keep the house in order, do her job, and stay out of the way. But something changed the moment Khalid began to notice a new dynamic in her. She wasn't like the others. While the other women in the mansion bowed to his will, seeking his attention and approval, Amara was different. She was polite but distant. She didn't seek to please him or attract his attention, and this attitude, which might have seemed simple, affected him in ways he never imagined. Khalid had always been a man accustomed to having whatever he wanted at his fingertips. His orders were law, and everyone around him bent to his will. But Amara wasn't like that. She seemed immune to his power, and it began to bother him. Deep down, he had never experienced what it was like to be challenged in such a subtle way. His obsession with her, which began as a game, grew silently. He didn't know exactly when, but it reached a point where he felt he had to have her. Amara, on the other hand, felt lost in this new world. The luxurious mansions, the elegant dinners, the obvious power of the Sheikh. All of this was so far from her reality. But unlike other employees, she didn't see herself as a mere piece in this opulent puzzle. She knew her worth, even though she felt overwhelmed by the expectations of her job. What she didn't know, however, was that her independence was beginning to captivate the Sheikh in an unusual way. He was beginning to see her not just as an employee, but as a woman with a quiet strength that intrigued him. It was something he couldn't control, and it frightened him. Khalid's mansion was not just a place of residence, but a microcosm of its owner's power and ostentation. The ambience reflected his solitary life: vast corridors, luxurious adornments, and priceless artifacts, all strategically displayed. The large windows offered panoramic views of the city, as if the Sheikh were looking down on the world, secluded in his ivory tower. Amara, for her part, spent most of her days in the kitchen or doing simple maintenance tasks, always in the background. She didn't interact much with the other servants, except for the brief exchanges necessary to carry out her duties. The mansion staff respected Khalid, but there was a certain fear in the air, as if everyone knew he could change his mood at any moment. To Amara, the Sheikh was just a distant shadow, someone she only glimpsed as she went about her tasks. However, over time, she began to notice little things: how Khalid, despite his coldness, observed her more often, especially during dinners and gatherings. She felt his eyes on her, but never dared to return them. There was something in his gaze that made her feel a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. She knew he was a powerful man who ruled his household and all his servants with an iron fist, but there was something more there, something she couldn't quite grasp. Khalid, on the other hand, was a man of few words, especially with his employees. His conversations were short, direct, and impersonal. However, with Amara, he found himself inexplicably drawn to the way she seemed unaffected by his power. He was accustomed to being the central figure, the object of admiration and awe, but Amara seemed completely uninterested in this power play. This made him feel something he had never experienced before: vulnerability. While it was clear that Khalid had control over everyone in the mansion, he had never had control over his own emotional life. He was a focused businessman and had no time for distractions. But Amara was no distraction. She was a constant presence with a subtle force that made him question his own intentions. What was this he felt for her? A simple attraction or something deeper? His obsession with her grew with each passing day, and he began taking subtle steps to connect with her more. He'd have her called in for small, non-essential errands just to see her more closely. And without realizing it, every moment he was near her consumed him more. He found himself observing her every detail, the way she moved her hands as she worked, the way her eyes reflected a tranquility he longed for. But unlike Khalid, Amara found herself increasingly torn. She knew the Sheik wasn't someone she could get involved with. He was a powerful man, steeped in a life of luxury and manipulation, yet at the same time there was something undeniable about his presence, something that stirred feelings in her she'd rather ignore. She knew she couldn't let him see her as just another woman bent on pleasing him, but at the same time, a part of her was touched by the attention he was beginning to show her. Deep down, Amara feared what she was beginning to feel. Her pride and autonomy were being challenged, and she didn't know how far she could resist the attraction Khalid was beginning to awaken in her. But try as she might, the Sheik's obsession with her was becoming increasingly evident. As the days passed, the tension between Amara and Khalid became more palpable. The Sheik, previously at peace with his absolute power, felt uneasy. He knew his obsession with her was growing, but at the same time, he couldn't understand what exactly made her so fascinating. He tried to resist this attraction, maintaining a cautious distance, but this only increased the sense of control he felt over her. Amara, on the other hand, was already beginning to notice something changing in Khalid's behavior. He had previously ignored her completely, but now constantly sought her out. Small gestures of attention, like asking her to personally serve him at dinner, became commonplace. He called her by name, with a gentleness that seemed out of place for someone so imposing. At first, she believed this was just another of his many ways of maintaining control over everyone around him. But as the days passed, she could no longer deny that his gaze toward her had changed. He no longer saw her as just a servant. There was something more, something that wasn't clear even to him, but that bothered him. This subtle transition began to change the way Khalid interacted with her. He tried to hide it, but his possessiveness was evident. He wanted more than mere observation. He wanted control. He wanted Amara by his side, and this need overwhelmed him. Amara, with her sensitivity and discernment, realized she could no longer ignore the signs. The Sheik was beginning to treat her differently. His gestures, though subtle, were intense. His words, though brief, carried a weight she could no longer ignore. She knew he disliked being rejected, and his seemingly cordial treatment was quickly turning into something more intimidating. He was trying to impose an intimacy she didn't want. Her internal struggle intensified. On the one hand, she felt an involuntary attraction to the attention he gave her, but on the other, she knew that if she allowed him to get any closer, she would be losing herself in a game she couldn't win. The fear of losing her autonomy, her freedom, kept her at bay. She wanted to remain the strong, independent woman she had always been, but she felt herself slipping away from that identity as she became increasingly entangled in Khalid's web. It was during dinner, as Amara carefully served the dishes, that Khalid finally approached her in a way she hadn't expected. He stood beside her, watching her with a gaze more intense than usual. She felt a chill run down her spine when he spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard before. "Amara, You've always been so reserved. What makes you think you can avoid me?" Those words fell upon her like a weight. She raised her eyes and found them fixed on her, unwavering. There was something possessive in his expression, something that made her realize he no longer saw her as beyond his reach. He believed she was his to control. Amara didn't respond immediately. The silence between them was tense, and she felt as if she were being tested in a way she'd never imagined. She knew he was crossing a line that could change everything between them, and the internal battle raging in her chest became harder to ignore. But it was in that moment, in that silent gaze and the weight of his words, that the real conflict began to form. Amara knew that to escape this game, she would have to make difficult choices. She would need to deal with Khalid's obsession strategically, without giving in to his attraction, but without further inciting his possessiveness. At the same time, a part of her questioned, would she be able to maintain her distance, or would he make her succumb to the temptation of a whole new world, a world of luxury, power, and perhaps love? The game Khalid had started, she knew, was just beginning, and with it would come obstacles she never imagined she would face. The tensions within Khalid al-Zahiri's mansion weren't limited to what was happening between him and Amara. Around them, a tangle of parallel stories unfolded, heightening the drama and further complicating their lives. Amara, despite trying to maintain her emotional distance, began to realize that she couldn't so easily escape the reality surrounding her. She wasn't alone in that mansion. Other servants, like Elias, the butler who had worked for Khalid for years, looked at her with a mixture of pity and caution. They knew that no one challenged the Sheik's authority without consequences. Elias, a middle-aged man, always warned Amara not to get too involved with her employer. "Beware of the Sheik," he whispered. "He can destroy you without a second thought." But Amara, increasingly touched by Khalid's silent obsession, found herself torn. She wondered if she should really listen to Elias, or if he was just exaggerating. His words made no sense when she was alone with Khalid, for he had never been anything but polite and charming to her. But it was when he watched her, silently, from afar, that something began to build inside her, a growing pressure, as if she was slowly being absorbed by the force of the Sheik's magnetism. On top of that, there was constant pressure from her own family. Her mother, a woman with high expectations and hopes for her daughter, kept urging Amara to improve her life. "You have to seize this opportunity, my daughter. This is your chance to live the life you deserve." But to Amara, this opportunity felt like a trap. She knew that by accepting a place in Khalid's life, she would be abandoning everything she believed to be right about who she was and what she wanted for herself. Khalid's family, on the other hand, was also beginning to notice the changes in his behavior. His sister, Layla, a free-spirited woman with a sharp mind, was particularly attentive to how her brother treated Amara. Layla had always been critical of Khalid, noticing a tendency to control everything and everyone around him. She was suspicious of her brother's intentions, but she couldn't deny that there was something peculiar about the growing relationship between him and Amara. Layla, in an attempt to warn Amara, began trying to strike up conversations with her during dinner, always with kindness disguised as curiosity. "I know the Sheik is difficult to deal with," Layla said to Amara one night as they sat in the kitchen, "but he has his own ghosts. And you, Amara, don't deserve to be a pawn in a game you didn't choose to play." Amara didn't know what to think. She liked Layla, but the bluntness of his words made her uncomfortable. It was as if, on the one hand, she was being protected, but on the other, she was being forced to make an impossible decision. As controlled as Khalid was, there was something about his obsession that seemed to intensify with each passing day, and it left Amara with a heavy heart, unsure of who to trust or which direction to take. The pressure, however, didn't just come from outside. Amara felt the weight of growing temptation within herself. There was something about Khalid she couldn't ignore. It was a mix of power, mystery, and the way he made her feel seen, like she was more than just a maid. He touched something in her she couldn't explain, something she'd never experienced before. Increasingly, she found herself yearning for something beyond what he offered. Khalid didn't see her as an ordinary woman, but as something unique, something he desired to possess. And this made her feel both attracted and repulsed. She didn't want to be controlled, but the very desire he aroused in her felt like a kind of invisible prison. As the tension between her and Khalid grew, Amara's choices became more complicated. Maintaining her distance from the Sheik became increasingly difficult, as he surrounded her with his attentions and gestures of dominance, and at the same time, she couldn't shake the impact he had on her. She found herself increasingly torn between her desire for freedom and the irresistible pull of Khalid's obsession. Tensions finally boiled over on the night of the gala at Khalid's mansion. It was an important event, a dinner with investors and influential figures, where Khalid always appeared impeccable, masterfully controlling the situation. But that night would be different. To Amara, it seemed like just another dinner to be attended with her usual discretion. But the Sheik had plans for her, and she didn't know it. Throughout the evening, Khalid maintained his initial distance, but his gaze never wavered. He watched her with an intensity she felt in every nerve ending. Amara tried to maintain her composure, but her heart beat faster with each passing moment. She knew something was about to change. He had called her to pour a glass of wine for one of his guests, but when she approached, he called her back to him, something she had never expected. "Amara, come here." His soft, commanding voice drew her closer, feeling the pressure of his eyes on her skin. She knelt beside him, her eyes avoiding his. Amara was aware something was happening, but she was fighting the turmoil inside her. What would Khalid do now? That's when he handed her the glass of wine, not to pour it, but to touch her lightly with his fingertips. The touch was almost insignificant, but the feeling that something was changing took over Amara. Her body reacted to him uncontrollably. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she could no longer resist. He watched her with predatory intensity, as if waiting for something, waiting for her to give in. "I'm not like you, Khalid." The words came out of his mouth almost without meaning to, with a tone of defiance. "I'm not another pawn in your game." Khalid was silent for a moment, and that was what frightened her most. He didn't respond immediately, as if pondering his words. What was he feeling? How would he react to Amara's challenge? She had underestimated him. Without warning, he rose from the table and took a step toward her. He grabbed her arm with a firmness that left her breathless. The room around them seemed to dissolve, and the rest of the world faded away. They were alone in that moment, in a place where social norms no longer applied. And Khalid, with palpable intensity, looked into her eyes and spoke in a low, almost threatening tone. "You have no idea what you're saying, Amara. I'm not a man who listens." The shock was immediate. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, so assertive. But instead of pulling away, she remained motionless, challenging him with her gaze. She knew he was trying to break her, that he wanted her to give in, but she wasn't willing to be another victim of his obsession. But something shifted in that instant, and they both knew the line between manipulation and passion had been crossed. Khalid's power was no longer what held him above everyone. It was his possessiveness, the way he had become obsessed with her. Amara felt the weight of the moment, as if everything around her had stopped. She could pull away, she could take a step back and maintain the distance he still respected. But she was trapped in that moment, in her own conflicting feelings. She couldn't deny that he was touching her in a way she'd never imagined. Something in her wanted to surrender, but another part knew it would mean losing her independence forever. Khalid, for his part, no longer cared about the rules or what she might want. Obsession had taken over his mind. He desired her and nothing else mattered, but he knew that possessing Amara would not be simple. She was not an easy woman to control, and this resistance, this strength she emanated, made her even more irresistible. It was in that moment, in that silent confrontation, that the game between them changed forever. Khalid, for the first time, didn't know what to do. He was in unfamiliar territory. He wanted to dominate her, but at the same time, there was something inside him that made him hesitate. Amara, on the other hand, found herself more lost than ever. She had pushed what seemed to be Khalid's limit, and now she was wondering if she could survive him, this obsession he had for her. The game between them was far from over, but now they knew that what was at stake was much more than a simple power struggle. It was something deeper, more dangerous, and above all, uncontrollable. The days following their confrontation on the night of the gala were fraught with palpable tension. Amara and Khalid found themselves in an emotional limbo, where unspoken words and unrevealed intentions hung between them like a thick cloud. Despite the intensity of the moment, it seemed neither wanted to take the next step, or perhaps both feared what might happen if they did. Khalid, for his part, found himself frustrated. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. Amara had crossed a line he hadn't thought she would dare cross, and instead of fighting back, he found himself reflecting on the situation with unexpected intensity. He, the man who always controlled situations, was being dominated by a woman who, paradoxically, didn't fear him. His obsession with her only grew, but doubt also crept into his mind. What did he really want from Amara? What did she mean to him beyond possession? He tried to mask his confusion, maintaining the facade of a powerful and unbeatable sheik. For the next few days, he maintained his usual pattern, seeking to distance himself emotionally from the situation. He became more deeply involved in his business commitments and began avoiding face-to-face meetings with Amara. However, each time he saw her, something inside him drew him to her with an irresistible force. She was somehow becoming indispensable to him, and he didn't like it. Amara, on the other hand, was dealing with her own internal storms. She felt further from her independence than ever. The resistance she had maintained through all those months of servitude was beginning to crumble. She knew Khalid's touch had left deep scars on her. His obsession with her was becoming impossible to ignore, but what haunted her most was her own response to him. She felt the temptation, the pull, and it made her feel vulnerable in ways she never imagined. But Amara wasn't an easy woman to dominate. She knew she needed to find a way to deal with Khalid's growing obsession without losing sight of who she was. She didn't want to be just another woman under his control. She needed to find a way to stand her ground while also not letting himself be swallowed up by his obsession. She knew her future in that mansion was becoming more uncertain by the day. The turning point not only altered the course of their interactions, but also tested everything Amara believed she could bear. She found herself caught between desire and fear, between the possibility of something more with Khalid and the need to protect her freedom. What he awakened in her wasn't just physical attraction, it was something deeper, more dangerous. And this internal battle began to erode her strength. Meanwhile, Khalid, in his moments of solitude, began to reflect more deeply on what was happening. He knew something had irrevocably changed. The control he had over everyone around him, including his own emotions, was breaking in the face of Amara. He didn't want to admit his vulnerability, but he knew he was falling for her in a way he couldn't control. And it terrified him. The reactions of both characters began to shape the course of the story. Amara tried desperately to maintain her distance, but her internal struggle only brought her closer to inevitability. Khalid, on the other hand, struggled to maintain his image of control, but his obsession with her was becoming the center of his life. He began to realize he couldn't push her away so easily, but at the same time, he wasn't ready to admit that what he felt for her was more than just lust. What was beginning to unfold between them was a struggle for emotional power. Neither was willing to give in completely, but both knew that somehow their relationship had already passed the point of no return. The game of control, which had seemed simple until then, was becoming a minefield of conflicting emotions and uncontrollable desires. The line between love and obsession was becoming increasingly blurred. Amara knew her choices would lead her to an emotional precipice. Khalid, meanwhile, found himself trapped in an obsession he could no longer control. They were about to cross a point of no return, and the consequences of their actions would resonate far beyond the walls of the mansion. As time passed, Amara found herself increasingly immersed in a dilemma that seemed to have no solution. Khalid's obsession became a constant shadow, a presence that followed her every move. She could no longer deny what she felt, but she also didn't know how to deal with what it meant. She longed for her independence, her freedom to act without being constantly observed, but the pressure of her own desire and Khalid's possessiveness made her feel trapped. However, something inside her began to shift. Amara realized that to escape this emotional trap, she needed to stop reacting to Khalid's actions and start acting for herself. She could no longer be a victim of her own feelings. It was time to take control of her own life and stop being the plaything of a hopeless obsession. The fight to preserve her identity was beginning to become her most important battle. It was one sunny afternoon, while walking through the mansion's gardens, that Amara had a moment of clarity. She looked around and saw the opulence that surrounded her, the grandeur of the mansion, the endless luxury, and the power Khalid held over everyone around him. But instead of feeling comfortable in this world, she felt even more alienated from herself. That life, with all its comforts, was not what she wanted. She longed for something deeper, something she could not find as long as she continued to submit to Khalid's obsession. She knew she needed to walk away, but the real question was how to do it without losing the essence of who she was. How to free herself without destroying herself in the process. Amara realized that to overcome Khalid's obsession, she needed to regain control of her own story. She would no longer be a passive spectator in his life. She would take control of what happened between them. Khalid, for his part, was also changing. His obsession with Amara, though growing more intense, began to be challenged by doubt. He couldn't understand why she wouldn't give in to him. She wasn't like other women he could conquer with a simple gesture. Something about her resisted, and it made him question what he truly wanted. Was he in love? Or was he simply overcome by the desire to control someone who couldn't be controlled? The fact that Amara wouldn't surrender so easily was somehow destabilizing his self-confidence. Khalid knew there was something about Amara that didn't fit the mold of the women he knew, and it drew him in a way he couldn't explain. Yet the more he tried to win her attention, the more she withdrew. This resistance, rather than pushing him away, seemed to fuel his obsession even further. He didn't like the feeling of losing control, and this lack of control made him question himself. What did he really want? Amara was a challenge, a woman who made him feel emotions he'd never known existed. And now, in his search for answers, he was beginning to realize that maintaining his usual coolness wouldn't be easy. As the two struggled with their emotions, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. Amara, for the first time, began to see Khalid differently. He wasn't just the powerful man she feared. He was also a vulnerable man, consumed by his own obsession. This didn't make her feel sorry for him, but it did make her see that, like her, Khalid was also in a constant struggle with himself. Amara's true breakthrough didn't come from physically escaping Khalid, but from finding a way to be true to herself while facing his power. She began to challenge herself not to give in, to stand firm in her beliefs, and above all, to not lose herself in the obsession Khalid projected upon her. The fight wasn't just against him, but against her own fears and insecurities. Khalid, on the other hand, began to question whether his desire for Amara was truly about power, or if there was something deeper. He could no longer distinguish between what he wanted and what he needed to control. He found himself caught in a dilemma: maintain his image as a powerful and controlling sheikh, or admit that to win Amara, he would have to give up everything he believed to be his strength. The challenge for both was no longer a question of power or control, it was a question of identity. Amara needed to reconnect with her true essence, while Khalid needed to confront his own limitations and realize that to have anything real with her, he would need to change. Their journey was far from easy, but for the first time, they both knew that the fight was for true freedom. The freedom to be who they truly were, unfettered by obsession or manipulation. The breakthrough they sought would not come without pain, but if they could keep going, they might both somehow find the peace they so desperately desired, or perhaps even love. As the confrontation between Amara and Khalid neared its climax, the air inside the mansion was charged with growing tension. Both were aware that the path they were traveling together could not continue much longer without closure. The emotional tension between them had reached its breaking point, and the choices they made from that moment on would be decisive for their future. Khalid, for the first time, began to question what he truly wanted. The desire to possess her, to dominate her, had transformed into something deeper. He felt an unbearable need to have Amara by his side, but he didn't know how to win her over without losing the control he'd always had over his life. He was willing to go further than he ever imagined to have her, but he was also beginning to realize that obsession, no matter how strong, couldn't be the sole foundation of a relationship. On the other hand, Amara was at a turning point. Resisting Khalid was becoming increasingly difficult, especially after everything they had been through together. But she also knew that if she gave in, she would lose herself. She didn't want to be a prisoner in a game of power and manipulation. The words of Elias, the butler, echoed in her mind. "Beware of the Sheik. He can destroy you without a second thought." She couldn't ignore it. But at the same time, there was something in her that craved Khalid's touch, his commanding presence, something that made her question her own convictions. Their conversations had become increasingly rare, but more charged with meaning. When they were alone, the silence between them spoke louder than any words could express. Desire was in the air, but there was also something else, an imminent clash between their needs and their limits. Layla, Khalid's sister, became an unexpected ally for Amara. She'd been watching their relationship unfold from afar, and while she knew she couldn't interfere directly, she was determined to help Amara navigate this situation without losing herself. During a confidential conversation, she approached Amara with a concerned look. "Amara, you know I care about you," Layla said, lowering her voice to make sure no one else could hear. "Khalid is complicated. He's never been easy to deal with. But you need to understand one thing. He doesn't know what love is. He just controls. If you're not careful, you'll lose yourself in this game." Amara felt the weight of Layla's words, but her mind was clouded. She knew Khalid had his own ghosts, which made him the cold and controlling man he was. But she also knew there was something genuine about him, something that drew her uncontrollably to him. The dilemma lay in her heart. Could she trust what he felt for her, or was she simply surrendering to his obsession? Meanwhile, Khalid found himself in a growing conflict. His obsession with Amara didn't diminish, but he was beginning to realize that his controlling and possessive attitudes were pushing her further away. He knew something had to change if he wanted to truly win her over, and for the first time, he was willing to do whatever it took to show Amara that he wasn't just a man of power. He wanted to be something more to her. The build-up to the climax was underway, and Khalid knew he could no longer hide behind his image as the unbeatable Sheik. He needed to expose himself, to be vulnerable, and this terrified him. Amara, on the other hand, felt the pressure of her own resistance. Her struggle to maintain her autonomy was reaching a critical point. She knew that sooner or later she would have to make a definitive decision about what to do with the conflicting feelings consuming her. What was approaching was not only the final confrontation between the two, but also an opportunity for transformation for both. Khalid could learn to love in a way he had never known before, but to do so, he would have to relinquish his control. Amara, in turn, would have to decide if she was willing to surrender to what Khalid offered, even if it meant losing a part of herself in the process. The truth about their feelings for each other was about to be revealed. The power play and obsession were about to give way to something more real, deeper. But for that to happen, both would have to face their own weaknesses and accept the consequences of what was about to happen. The night was silent, but charged with an electric tension that seemed to pulse in every corner of the mansion. Amara knew the final confrontation with Khalid was near. She could feel it in the air. Their relationship, marked by intense emotions and a dangerous power struggle, had reached its limit. She could no longer continue to struggle between attraction and repulsion, between the need for freedom and the burning desire Khalid provoked in her. Khalid, for his part, was at a breaking point. He knew his obsession with Amara was no longer just a desire for control. There was something deeper in his soul that made him feel he couldn't live without her. But at the same time, he was aware that his methods were pushing her away. He didn't know what else to do to keep her by his side, and doubt gnawed at him. He was about to lose what he wanted most, and this left him vulnerable in ways he never imagined. Amara, as resolute as she was in her decision not to give in to him, felt caught in a whirlwind of emotions that left her feeling unsteady. She knew that if she wanted to completely free herself from Khalid's obsession, she would have to face him once and for all, but that would mean jeopardizing not only her relationship with him, but also her very identity. She was falling in love, and it frightened her deeply. Then on a stormy night, the tension finally exploded. Khalid summoned Amara to his office, a private, secluded room where he usually made his most important decisions. The sound of rain pounding on the windows and the lightning illuminating the darkness made the room even more charged with an air of uncertainty. Khalid was there, alone, waiting for her. His normally unflappable eyes were now filled with an intensity Amara had never seen before. "Amara," he began, his voice low and husky, almost a whisper. "You're running away from me. I see it, but I can't go on like this. I can't live without you." She stared at him with a mixture of anger and sadness. She knew he was telling the truth, but the way he expressed himself still sounded like a man who wanted to dominate her, not love her. She couldn't tolerate it anymore. "I'm not yours, Khalid." Her voice was firm, but the tremor in her words betrayed her inner struggle. "I'm not a possession. You can't control me like that." Khalid took a step toward her, but stopped before touching her, as if afraid of going too far. The internal battle he was waging was visible on his face. He wanted to move closer, but there was something in her posture that made him hesitate. "You don't understand," he said, the pain evident in his voice. "I don't know how to live without you. You're not just a woman to me. You're everything." Amara felt a deep ache in her chest. She knew he meant it, but his words weren't enough. She needed something more. She didn't want to be loved by a man who saw her as his property, as a prize to be won. She needed to be seen as a whole person, someone with her own identity and freedom. "You've never seen me as I truly am, Khalid," Amara said, her eyes shining with tears. "You want me, but you don't understand me. If you truly loved me, you would let me be who I am, without trying to control me." The silence that followed was heavy, as if the air itself had stopped breathing. Khalid pulled away, looking lost. He stared at her as if trying to process everything she was saying. The obsession, the desire, the control, all of it was being unraveled piece by piece by the truth Amara was forcing upon him. It was at that moment that he realized she was right. The love he felt for her couldn't be based on control. He couldn't possess her the way he desired. For her to truly be his, he would need to let her go, allow her freedom. And as painful as it was, he knew it was the only way to truly win her. "I love you, Amara," he finally spoke, the sincerity in his voice shattering the facade of power he maintained. "But I can't be the man you need if I keep trying to control you." Amara stood there speechless. Khalid's revelation left her speechless. He was finally understanding, but she also knew the battle wasn't won. She needed more. She needed to believe he could change, that his love for her was genuine. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on his. It was time to choose. "If you really love me, Khalid, let me be who I am. Just let me be free. The rest we can figure out together." He stared at her for a long moment, and then, with a deep sigh, he nodded. Finally, he was willing to give up control, to allow her the freedom she craved. The change they both experienced was profound and transformative. Khalid, the imposing and controlling Sheik, now found himself facing a reality he never imagined he would have to face: the need to let go. He had built his entire life around power and domination, and as difficult as it was to admit, he understood that true love required something he had never known how to give: freedom. Amara, for her part, found the strength to remain true to herself. The process of overcoming that had begun as a simple desire to maintain her independence, became a path to self-discovery. By challenging Khalid, she wasn't just fighting him. She was fighting to reclaim her own voice, to understand what it meant to be truly free. What followed was a period of rediscovery. Khalid began to move away from his old ways. He made a point of demonstrating his sincerity, learning to respect Amara's boundaries and support her choices. It was a gradual process, but he was willing to go through it. Amara, in turn, agreed to give him a chance. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she believed that Khalid wasn't the man who had tried to possess her, but rather someone who was beginning to understand what it meant to love her properly. They began to rebuild their relationship, but in a different way. No longer based on obsession, but on mutual respect, understanding, and a true partnership. They learned to give each other space, to support each other's individual dreams, and at the same time to build something together. It was a love unlike anything either of them had ever experienced, but it was real. The mansion, which had once been a stage for manipulation and control, now became the symbol of a new beginning. They learned that for any relationship to survive, it needed to be fueled by trust, respect, and the freedom to be who they truly were. Khalid finally understood that love wasn't something he could conquer or control. He learned to make room for others, and in doing so, he truly won Amara's heart. Not because he possessed her, but because she freely chose to be by his side. And so, despite the difficulties, the two moved forward, no longer prisoners of their own fears and insecurities, but partners who finally had the chance to write their own love story. Years later, the mansion that had once been the scene of a tumultuous love affair now housed a happy and serene family. Khalid and Amara had built a life together, no longer dominated by obsessions, but by mutual choices and respect. The transformation they both underwent hadn't been easy, but it was evident in every gesture, every shared smile. They walked through life side by side, knowing that true love required freedom and trust. Their story, marked by ups and downs, became a lesson in growth, and finally, they both found the peace they so desperately sought. What do you think of this intense, twist-filled story? And comment below and share your opinion. Do you believe Khalid and Amara truly managed to transform their relationship, or do the ghosts of the past still haunt them? Be sure to like and share with your friends who love a story of love, obsession, and overcoming obstacles. And if you want more exciting stories like this, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date. Let's explore the deepest depths of human relationships together.